We got Sandy here in the brown coat. He's going to be our gaffer today. Then we have an extra special treat because we have Colin assisting today. So we have an extra pair of hands. So really quickly, I just want to sort of go through all of the equipment at the beginning of our demonstration. So down there, Colin's right next to our furnace. That furnace sits at about 2100 degrees. We leave it running 24/7, 365. It's a lot easier to just leave it turned on and hot and running than to turn the whole thing off, let it cool down, take all the glass out, put all the glass back in. So we only turn it off maybe once a year, maybe twice, and that stays running the whole time. Then Colin's going to go over to our pipe warmer. He's going to go ahead and grab a little pipe. He's going to pick up a stick of color bar. But all of our pipes need to be preheated. I'll grab a blowpipe to show you. So Sandy's going to actually build our piece on a blowpipe. This one's got a nice hollow end. It's got this little, I'm going to not hit Colin in the head. And it's got this nice little mouthpiece so you can actually blow into the end of the pipe. Colin's going to be picking up a stick of color bar, so he's going to do a little bit of prep work for Sandy. But all of our pipes have to get preheated, otherwise we can't actually gather the glass on it. Colin's going into our pickup oven, stabbing up a little chunk of color, and we'll talk about that in a second. But our last main piece of equipment is our reheating chamber. So Colin just picked up that piece of glass. It sits in this kiln at about 92 degrees. That's our annealing point for glass. So that's where it sort of becomes the room temperature material that you're familiar with, but it's also still pretty hot. So Colin's got his piece of color bar. He's going to wipe off any dust on there. Oh, embarrassing. In front of everyone on the internet, Colin. No more dust. Colin's going to heat that up a little bit. So Colin has to take this all the way back up to that 21 degree temperature. Sandy's going to get a little gather of glass. He's going to make what we call a starter bubble. So he's got a nice little bit. And we make a starter bubble just because it starts to build up material. You'll notice we double in size every time we go to the furnace. So it's a lot easier for us to introduce air right in the beginning. So Sandy's letting all of that glass fall off. Oh, okay, that's fine. I'm going to take this bar away from Colin. And Sandy's going to shape that bubble up. So we're going to do what's called the color drop. And we're basically going to drop this little chunk of bar that I've got on top of Sandy's bubble, and we're sort of going to encase this color in. Our furnace is entirely colorless, so all of that glass is totally clear. Do you want to put a line in this? Or do you just want to... Okay. Just wanted to check. So we can add all of our colors separately. And I'll show you guys what type of forms the color comes in once we're done with this. I'm almost there, Sandy. Cut me free. And Sandy's going to physically smear that color bar right on top of our bubble. I'll show you guys what a cold piece of color bar looks like. So there's our cold color bar. We can purchase color bar from about 3 different manufacturers across the world. Since our tank is entirely colorless and this is a public access studio, we really want to make sure that people can make all different kinds of work. So everything in there is clear, and then we can introduce these colors separately. And to make your own glass color, it's not really like paint. We can't mix blue glass and red glass and make purple. Everything happens chemically. So, if Sandy, what color are we working with today? We got an ambery color. That's where it gets complicated. But if Sandy were working with like a blue, there's this very famous cobalt blue. You take a little bit of cobalt, you throw it into the glass, it turns the entire tank cobalt blue. So different manufacturers will just have different tanks of all different colors, and they'll roll their color out in a color bar. And since it's the same type of glass that we're working with, we can add it onto our glass and it'll work totally fine. Sandy's gonna smear that color right over top of our bubble. Different colors can get different levels of complicated. So our blues are really simple. They're the copper and the cobalt. If we would add iron, it would make green glass. But once we start getting into the browns and like the reds, there's a lot of different things that you can throw in there to make those colors. So red, you have to do like the gold, and that's where it starts getting really expensive. Our blue glasses are a little bit cheaper. If we were working in a factory setting, what they actually do is they take all of the glass out of their furnace. They just work with blue for a little bit, make as much product as they want, use up all that blue, and then they just switch tanks. But for us, it takes quite a bit longer to go through 700 pounds of glass, so we want to keep it all nice and clear. So Sandy's going to smush that on top. When he's working with this, he doesn't want to leave any texture or any edges, because we're about to go back into the furnace. Sandy maybe has enough glass right now to make like a small cup, a tiny bottle, but I think he's going to take maybe a dip and a half more. So Sandy's using our mini marver. This is just a small version of our big marver. And he's really selectively shaping, but also selectively cooling. Because we like to say that glass is a memory, and you'll hear me talk about this a couple times. As soon as we start touching it with either the marver or a tool, that glass is going to remember that all throughout the process. So Sandy's being very selective with how he's heating and moving his color. To put another dip on top of this. And when we're gathering, it's not really like, we're not working with solid glass, right? And you guys haven't seen a really, really fresh gather yet, but once Sandy takes a dip on top of this, you'll see the consistency of the glass that's in the furnace is almost like honey. Think of like taking a chopstick and sticking it into a bowl of honey and trying to wind up as much material as you can. It can be really challenging. And for Sandy to be able to gather up enough glass to make an entire vase or whatever, it's going to take crazy human strength. So we like to work in layers. So we're going to let that set up a little bit, and then we can take another dip on top. The other thing about working with color is if that Sandy gets any of that color into our furnace, it can actually tinge the entire pot an ambery brown. And then everybody's working with amber glass for like 3 to 5 years, and nobody's thrilled. So Sandy's been doing this long enough that he knows how to let it set up a little bit, and once he's ready to go back in the furnace, we can get another layer on top. A good indication for us is color. Amber glass is all right to work with. Some glasses will glow really bright or stay glowing the entire time that you're working with them. But amber glass is all right. So you can see our really, really fresh gather. It's got that bright, bright heat light. I know it looks orange, but I promise it's clear. Anything rocking at 2100 degrees, I guarantee you is going to glow bright orange. Do you want a 10?
Yes.
It's close. Sandy's going in with our wooden block tool. Most of our tools are made out of stainless steel, but a select few are made out of wood. And this is a special type of wood. All of these are made out of fruit wood. In our case, it's cherry. And this is just a wood with a really tight grain pattern. So basically, there's not a lot of like sap inside of the wood. If we use a high sap content wood, it's going to cause it to burn really easily. But we leave that nice and waterlogged, and that allows us to sort of shape the glass. If we were to actually come out of the furnace and just turn really evenly, eventually that glass wants to go back into that Q-tip block shape. But this allows us to work a little bit quicker. When we're working in here, heat's sort of the name of the game. So Sandy really has to work as quickly as possible once we're out of the furnace to really take advantage of that heat. Because the glass comes out at 2100, that's really the hottest it'll ever be. Working temperature is somewhere between like 1500 and 1900 realistically. Sandy's giving it a little bit of air and we can start to see it inflate. The cool thing about color bar is that it's going to make this object look like it's all one color. So we're sort of taking advantage of the optic properties of glass. If you were to buy something made in our studio and then smash it into a billion pieces, you can pick up a piece and look at the inside and it'll actually just have a razor thin layer of clear and then a razor thin layer of color and then all clear on the outside. So we get to sort of use an optical illusion. There's another type of glass I'll show you guys really quick that we're going to use a little bit later on. Well, Sandy's getting his noodle hooked up. And the other type of glass is called Frit. I got a nice little bowl here. If you've ever taken a workshop with us, this is what we would use. These are just tiny pieces of glass. So color bar is nice because it all looks one color. But Frit comes in all different sizes and shapes, so we can add a little bit more of a textured effect to the outside of our glass. And we're going to put some bits on this, so we'll use Frit a little bit later on. Right, Sandy?
Yeah, I'm just going to take up a little bit and I'll have to bring me a body wrap.
Oh, this is basically just a piece of surgical tubing that Sandy can then hook up into his mouth and it'll allow him to sort of blow into the end of the pipe. I'm going to keep it untangled for him. Boop. Sometimes your swivel will get too far stuck in and then it won't want to turn. So sometimes you got to peel it out a little bit, but that's okay. You want me from behind, Sandy?
Yes, please.
Okay.
We can get started now.
You want like a double dip?
A double dip, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to get a little bit of glass for Sandy, and the best thing about working with hot glass is how well it sticks to other hot glass. So we don't really have to do any prep work. We don't have to really do a lot of preheating and measuring and chemical treatment. I'm just going to get a quick double dip of glass. I'm going to cool this pipe down a little bit. And we're going to put something called a wrap on the outside of this. And a wrap is basically just wrapping it with glass, right? When we're working with stuff in here, the jargon is pretty simple. Is that good, Sandy? Okay. I'm going to cool my pipe off. You'll notice us coming to the pipe cooler. This is mostly because we want to have a really wide range of motion. So you want to sort of hold your pipe like a hockey stick. And if it's too warm, you have to sort of hold it at the end. And that can be far more challenging to turn. You want a couple coats of this?
Yeah.
We got a pretty chunky white.
That's great.
So I'll melt our Frit in. This is our Frit I was talking about before. It's that same colored glass, just chunked up into teeny tiny pieces. And since the pieces are so small, we don't really have to do any preheating. I'll do one more coat, Sandy.
Okay.
And then like a shape, and then I'll be over. White is a great glass because it's really the stiffest type of glass just because of the titanium that's in it. You really have to get it hot to get it to move, but once it's warm, it'll stay warm for a pretty long time. So I'm going to shape this up on our mini marver so that Sandy can have a good time attaching it. just need one more shape, Sandy.
No problem.
I'm gonna point this up a little bit more. That way Sandy has more control over how much he's attaching on. Whoop. Then I'm actually gonna come from behind Sandy's bench and he's gonna grab onto me with his shears. He's gonna actually stick the bit on and sort of spin it around our bubble. You gonna snip? Sorry. Then it sticks right on, and then I'm guessing we'll go back in with our block tool, maybe our newspaper, maybe our marver. Sandy has all kinds of options in terms of squishing glass into other glass. He's gonna go in with his tweezers, manipulate it a little bit. Once we start blowing this up, you'll be able to see that memory from those tweezer marks. And it'll always have that little bit of a swirl. And the nice thing about this is that that white glass was just hot enough to really stretch and move, but our bubble is nice and set up. So Sandy pretty has a good amount of time before that bubble starts to move a little bit, where he can really manipulate that outer wrap. Now we can really start to see that heat show up in our bubble. And the cool thing about Frit is that since we've stretched out those tiny pieces, you can sort of see all of those teeny tiny lines in our glass. The Sandy will do that a couple more times, and then we can take one more gather on top of this. Right now we could probably make a pretty large cup, maybe a small bud vase, but I know Sandy wants to go a little bit bigger.
Not crazy.
Not crazy big.
I promise.
It's okay. Crazy big involves more people, right? So when we're blowing glass and we're making large work, you really want to have a team of at least 3 people so that everybody can really coordinate and get stuff done without putting too much strain on your body. When it's just 2 people making a large piece, by the end you get really tired. You gotta take a long break. When people professionally make large work, sometimes they'll do it all day long. And then over the lunch break, it'll just be one guy's job just to flash over lunch and sort of take maintenance heats to make sure nothing breaks. So we're getting there. Sandy doesn't want to leave any sort of indentations, because just like when we put the overlay on, if he has sort of a big divot, like when we first put the wrap on, and he goes to gather on top, it's going to trap a giant air bubble. And we can use that to our advantage sometimes. If you ever see those paperweights with the big air bubble in it, how they do that is they just make a big indentation in the glass and then gather on top. But in Sandy's case, I know he wants no air bubbles. So we're going to smooth it out. And you'll notice Sandy's turning the entire time. So when we're working, we really have to think about remaining on center. And you know, when you take a pottery class in the beginning, you sort of learn how to center the clay. When we're working in here, we really have to do that throughout the entire piece. So you'll notice Sandy goes back and forth on the marver table. If he ever just picks one direction, it'll actually physically wind that glass up and it'll start to twist up. So like whenever you see demonstrations where Colin makes cane, sometimes he'll twist it up on purpose. But I know Sandy doesn't want that. He's got like a nice cloudscape happening with our lovely white wrap. Now we're getting pretty close. So the big difference with different types of glass that you can work with is that we're melting a soda lime glass. So basically, the base of all glass and all rocks and basically everything in the world is silica. So all non-laving matter is basically based off of silica, except for metal, but that's complicated. So any rock you pick up is silica based. All forms of sand are silica based. So we basically melt raw silica, but to melt raw silica, you would have to get it really, really hot. And we're already working with 2100 degrees. We don't want to have to get it any hotter than we need to. So for soda lime glass, the soda part is soda ash, which you can throw in, and that sort of works as a flux. So if you've ever worked with metal, in order to melt things at a lower temperature, you add a flux into it, and it creates a chemical reaction where it's a different type of environment. The other thing that we're working with is limestone, so that's the lime part of the soda lime glass. And limestone's really nice because it works as a stabilizer. So if you were to take any piece from our ancient collection and stick it in a bucket and leave it for a couple years, eventually it's going to break down and just go back into that raw silica. So that's actually water soluble. So our glass is pretty strong. As a material, then really the thing that can cause it to fail is breaking. But if we were to just leave this like this, cut a jack line in it and put it away, you could be pretty aggressive with that material. I know people who have like chucked paperweights across hallways and they've been fine. The very first piece I ever made in a glass class, my teacher was like, don't worry, you won't break anything that you make. And he took it and he threw it across a room, and he was right. I still have it. It was fine. So once we start to get thinner, that's when we have to worry a little bit. But right now, we're pretty solid. No concerns. So Sandy's gonna come over. I know Sandy doesn't want to get crazy, so we'll probably do a strip gather on top of this. That looks pretty cool. Every time we take a gather, we basically double the volume of our glass. So once you start getting to like 3-4 gathers, that's where it starts to get a little crazy. Sandy's going in, he's turning. You notice he has to turn pretty quickly. Remember, it's chopstick and honey. We have to work fast. He can come on out, and he's gonna go straight up and down. And gravity's naturally gonna pull all of that hot molten glass off and into our bucket. And the other cool thing about hot glass is that it's infinitely elastic, right? So you just saw that thread pull off of Sandy's gather. If we were to take this hot gather, I grab one end, Sandy has the other end of the pipe, we could basically run all the way to the main museum and all the way to the parking lot. And we could just keep going and going and going. Do you want a bigger block? Okay. Let me know if you need one. So Sandy's going back on with our wooden block. And the wooden block is using that steam barrier. You can really start to see that steam. So it's that same effect where if you have a hot pan on your stove and you throw a little bit of water on it, it does that little dancey thing. That's called our Leidenfrost effect. So what Sandy's really doing right now is he's evening out the heat between layers, right? Because our first layer, even before we put the color on, is really, really cold right now. And our outermost layer is really, really hot. It's that moving, gooey glass. So Sandy's gonna go into our reheating chamber and really even those heats out. So we start to get the entire thing really moving. Sandy's going on with our newspaper tool, which is my favorite tool. The hardest part about working with glass is that we can never really touch it, right? Like this thing is way too hot for Sandy to touch with his hands. He's gonna immediately get burnt. So when you're making an object, and a good example of this is ceramics, right? When you throw a pot, you can feel the sides of the pot, feel the sides of your object. But when we're working in here, we can never touch anything, and everything is usually felt through our tools. But our newspaper is just 8 to 10 sheets of newspaper folded up. Some people like less, some people like more. If you really take care of a paper, it can last up to a year. I know people who will like tuck it into a little Ziploc baggie at the end of the day, keep it nice and moist, various states of dampness. But what Sandy's doing right now is he's really starting to focus the weight on the bottom. So when we're making an object in here, we have to be really conscious of how we're making it, right? Since glass is such a fragile material. If Sandy makes it really, really thin on the bottom, it's going to be really, really top heavy. And you know, like those bozo clown dolls where you knock them over and they pop back up because they're all top weighted? That doesn't really work in here. So you just get precariously balanced, and then your precariously balanced object gets knocked over by a cat or a dog or something, and then it shatters into a million pieces. So when people first start blowing glass, stuff stays really bottom light, top heavy. You break a bunch of cups, and eventually you learn how important bottom weighting is. And I think Sandy wants to put a foot on this, so he doesn't have to get too crazy. You'll start to hear me talk about this sort of like a body. So the part that's closest to the pipe, that's called our moil. That's sort of an indicator of how hot the glass is. So if the moil starts cracking, we know we need to start introducing heat into that bubble. When our moil is always glass, all of that glass pops up out of the pipe as it starts to cool down. If it's clear, we can throw it right back into the furnace and recycle it. But after the moil is our neck. So I know Sandy's probably going to pull a bottleneck out on this. So the top that's closest to the pipe is our neck. And then we have our shoulder, which is sort of like the shoulders of your body, right? It's beneath the neck. Well, our shoulder is typically the part that will end up being the top of our cup or our bottle or whatever. So we really want to have control and inflate that shoulder so that thing stays nice and bottom heavy. Oh yeah, I got you. I'm gonna plug Sandy's hose in. Ready?
Yep, thank you very much.
No problem. You want a shield? Okay. You'll notice Sandy has nice long sleeves on, and you wonder, it's pretty hot in here, right? It gets pretty warm. In the winter time, it's nice because it's cold outside and warm in here. But we're getting to that point where it's starting to feel pretty warm in here because it's warm outside. So Sandy wears long sleeves to protect his forearm skin, and you would be surprised at how sensitive that skin really is because the interior of your forearm never really sees the sun. It stays close to your body most of the time. So once you start working with glass, you'll often get heat rash right on your forearm. Sandy's got big plans for this evening. You can't have heat rash forearm. So Sandy's going on with his jacks. And this is sort of our iconic glass blower tool. Theoretically, you can make every piece you ever want just with your jacks. Sandy's going in with our fluffy torch. This gives him a little bit more control in how he's heating. So our reheating chamber heat is really aggressive from all sides. So in order to get a little bit more control, he's just torching right by the neck, and that'll give him a little bit more of an easy time pulling out our bottleneck. So he's got that torched up. We'll go back into the reheating chamber, give it a good all-around heat. The tough part about pulling bottlenecks is that once an object starts to get long and thin, it's really hard to turn. So Sandy can make it a little bit easier on himself by torching that neck. Sandy can come on out. You can already see it start to wiggle a little bit. He's gonna come on with his paper, give it a little bit more of an inflate, and then go back into town to pull that bottleneck out. And remember, glass has that memory, so every time we touch it with the torch, that back part of the glass is really gonna remember that later on. So we can really start to use that to our advantage. What's up? Yeah, I got you. It's hot. I know, it's particularly hot in here today. We've been sort of spoiled with all the cold weather, but now it's like sunny and nice outside, so it starts to feel really hot. I'm coming on with, we have a nice wooden paddle that's to really sort of radiate heat. So even though my hand is pretty far away compared to Sandy's, I can already start to feel that heat on my own hands. Sandy's putting in our constriction line. So you'll notice nothing in the collection has a pipe stuck to the end of it, right? We have to be able to physically break this off later on. And our constriction line is basically just suggesting where the glass, where we want it to break. So it's going to break at our most constricted point. So when you first start blowing glass, you sort of learn to make snowmen, and you make the head the tightest part. You knock that part off, and then the middle, and then you knock that part off, and then the end, and then you can knock the whole thing off. But if we were to make snowmen and we wanted to break them off as a whole, we would just make sure our narrowest jack line is the one that's closest to the pipe. Coming back on with a shield for Sandy, he can stretch that neck out a little bit more. And then go in and make that constriction line even tighter. The tough thing about bottles is if you accidentally make your neck too narrow at the end, sometimes you can knock it off in the wrong spot. But Sandy's been doing this long enough, he doesn't really have to worry about that. Beautiful. Sandy's arranged it so that we have that nice clean neck, and then our wrap sort of starts at the body of our bottle. You want to flip for this? You want to shape it a little bit?
Yeah, we're going to drop it out there.
Okay. You want to drop foot still?
Maybe. We'll see.
Okay.
Can you just open a door, please?
Oh, yeah, of course. Left.
Yeah.
The nice thing about our reheating chamber is it has these two sets of doors. So as it starts to get larger and larger, we can open different levels of it. Once we start opening the big doors, though, that's when it's really nice to have a third person, because they can just be in charge of opening and closing the doors. I know you guys can't feel the difference in heat, but I certainly can feel the difference here, even when we just open one door. Sandy's going in with our newspaper. He's inflating that shoulder a little bit, starting to inflate the body of the piece. And this is that same tiny bubble he popped at the beginning, just slowly and slowly more inflated. When we're blowing, you have to sort of think of it like a balloon. If Sandy blows really, really hard, really fast, it can really easily pop that glass when it's molten hot. But now that it's pretty set up, we don't have to super worry about that. Sandy can blow pretty hard and not have to worry about it. The tough thing is, though, we can always put more air in, but we can never take air out. So once it's blown up, it's staying that thickness unless you really work to condense it back down. Sandy's going to give that bubble a heat. And you'll notice he doesn't want to take that jack line into the reheating chamber anymore. He'll give it little flashes or maintenance heats just to keep it nice and warm. But if we get that jack line really, really hot, it's really going to start moving inefficiently. It's going to be really challenging for Sandy to turn. Sandy's going in with his paper, giving him a little bit of inflate. I'll protect that hand. Having a shield is nice because we really have a very short working time. So you'll notice Sandy is up and down, and he's staying in the furnace a long time to get that white hop and that amber.
We're going to pedal the bottom of this.
Okay. And if you're spending all of your working time sort of getting adjusted to the heat of the piece, you're really wasting gas. And all of our equipment in here is run on natural gas and forced air. I didn't mention it at the beginning, but all of our equipment is pretty much made out of a high fire ceramic material. We call it fire brick. It has a couple different names. And then basically it's fire brick and steel for everything that you see, except for the bench. So we're really, really rocking at really warm temperatures. That's sort of the challenging part, especially when you've taken a break from being in here for a bit. I think it's been a week or two since I've blown glass, and I can really feel the difference in the heat. So I'm coming on with our wooden paddle, and we're basically making a mold between my paddle and Sandy's jacks. And we're putting a nice indent, so that way this makes nice contact with whatever table it's sitting on.
Alright, so I can do a funny.
Yep. So we're gonna give that a second, and then we're gonna actually flip it around. So now that we have our bottom nice and set up, I'm gonna make Sandy something called a punty. And our punty is basically the Italian word for point or bridge. So we're gonna stick a little point of glass onto the bottom, break it off at the constriction line, flip it around, and then Sandy can start working on the top. And I want to make this punty the right shape. This is where I get really quiet because I have to pay attention. I'm basically making a little Q-tip of glass so that Sandy can then stick it onto the end of his piece, and we can flip this thing around. Hold on, Sandy, I gotta fix this. My pipe is a little too cold. I was trying to rush it. There we go. I'm gonna give this pipe a quick cool down, and then we'll be ready. We got both chambers on today, so I can heat up in this hole. You want to flash one more time? Okay. It's okay. I'm going to give it a little extra marker. Clean it up a little bit. We got the time. When I come on over, Sandy can stick me right on. And you'll notice he's turning the entire time. That's so that we can make sure that this is nice and on center. If we stick the punty on super crooked and we start to open this thing up, the entire neck of the bottle is going to be super off center. Ready? Yep. So Sandy's giving a little bit of heat shock using his nice cold jacks. And then that little bit of a tap sends enough of a vibration into our blowpipe that it actually knocks this thing off of the constriction line. For you. Okay. Sandy's got enough heat in his punty that he can go ahead and center that object. While that sets up a little bit, make sure we're nice and straight. Then once that starts to set up, we can start heating up the face of our glass. And this was just cold enough for us to knock it and break it like regular glass, right? It's sort of similar to that room temperature, that material that you're familiar with. So this is really going to be Sandy's longest reheat. And you'll notice normally we're up and down, we do a lot of moving. So staying up there, it can get pretty tiring, especially with that door open. You get sweaty fast. I remember being 19 and in college and you can open all of the doors and you don't mind anymore, but now I'm 25 and tired. This is very challenging on your body. I like to keep all the doors closed as much as possible. So the fun thing about glass is that, I say fun, the cruel thing about glass is that thin glass gets hot really fast and cools down really fast. And thick glass takes forever to heat up, but then it stays hot for a long time, just because of glass just because glass is a very good insulating material, so it insulates itself into being warm. So Sandy, when we knocked that off of the construction line, the thickest got out a little bit. And he's got a couple different ways he can do this. Since this is a bottle, I have a pretty good feeling that he's gonna jack and crack it off. He's got duckbill shears though, so he might surprise me. So Sandy's going in with his tweezers, he's giving little pinches. This sort of works as a handle for him to pull on, and then he can start to really elongate and pull our neck out. So he's got his nice little handle. Some people call that a floret. They use it as sort of an artistic choice. But I know Sandy, and I know Sandy does not care for that. So we're going to chop this little floret off once Sandy's done stretching it out. And our floret really acts as just a handle, right? So he's pinching and he's making a little spot that he can pinch over and over again. Just remember, glass has that memory. So he's touched it with that cold steel, so it's going to stay nice and cold. And then he can start to pull it up a little bit. Now he's going to go in and he's going to put in another constriction line. And we're going to use that same principle that we used to take this off of the blowpipe. The part where the glass is the narrowest is where it wants to break. So Sandy's selectively cooling that area. He's going to take a quick flash just to make sure that Punty's nice and happy. This is a really easy time for this piece to fall up onto the ground because we're going to actually tap that floret off. And if I didn't make Sandy a good enough Punty, it can really easily crack and break. So he's going to cool it selectively with his diamond shears. And I'm going to give it a little tap. There we go. And that can pop right off. Sandy's going to go back into our reheating chamber. And the tough thing about bottles is if you make that constriction point too narrow, you can't really get a lot of heat in there right away. So Sandy's going to go in with just one jack blade, open it up a little bit, make sure we're not going to fuse back to ourselves. We get to cheat a little bit with the hot torch, because normally we don't have that out, but production guys got it out today. The hot torch is like our fluffy torch. It just gets really, really hot and has a much more small and controlled flame. You can see we got that teeny tiny hole, but if Sandy goes back into that reheating chamber, that hole's so small and that heat's so aggressive that it's really just going to fuse to itself and close up. So he's going to give it a quick flash. Give it a good maintenance heat, keep everybody happy. Sometimes you hear that little glass breaking in the background. I promise that's not the piece. As the pipes start to cool down, that glass is going to naturally peel off of them. So you can always hear it in the background. That glass popping off the pipes. We got our teeny tiny hole. Now Sandy can go in with one jack blade. Or his tweezers. He's going to retweeze. Now he can really open it up. And then go in with his jacks and shape it up. Do you want a paddle?
Yeah, we're going to do a heat on this and clear it overnight.
Okay. Nothing ever happens. Sandy can fix it. So we're going to use our paddle just like we did before to sort of use it like a mold. So Sandy's going to go in on the interior of our bottleneck with his jacks. I'm going to go ahead and give this a nice press and shape it up. Sandy's going to go in. He's going to use that like a mold. You want me on? I'm going to come on, make this nice and flat. And Sandy's physically shaping the back of our neck up.
Beautiful.
Nice.
Put this away.
Okay. We got that nice and set up. Now we're going to do something called flashing down. You know what face shield is? Oh. So if we were to just leave this piece out in room temperature air, it's totally going to cool down way too quickly and crack and break into a million pieces. So I'm going to put on my super cool jacket. Sandy's going to flash this down, and what he's looking for is a little bit of movement in that punty. If we go and we try to crack this off a little bit too early, it can cause it to really chip out the bottom of the piece. And then we'd have to go in and finish that in later, which is a little bit more work than we want to do. So Sandy's giving it nice long flashes. And once we see it start to really move, that's when we know we can take it off. Then I know Sandy's ready. He's coming on over. Our Punty Connection is the connection that's designed to fail. So Sandy's going to find something. There we go. He's got a nice knife. And he's putting that water all the way up to where the punty meets the bottom of the piece. I got it. Just going to give it a tap. Comes right off. Oh, that's fun. It's okay.
No, it doesn't matter.
We'll fix it later.
Sure.
Right. And we can load that away in our annealing oven. So that oven sits at about 900 degrees. We want to let that cool down slowly. So if that glass ever gets cold too quickly, it's going to cause a lot of heat stress and cause it to crack and break. So we let that cool down overnight. The thickest part of that's probably the bottom. It's not super thick. It'll probably be done around this time tomorrow. But a good example we have of long annealing is that bench in our ancient gallery. That annealed for about 11 months. And it still has teeny tiny cracks in it. So we want to make sure everything gets cooled down nicely, nice and smooth. If you guys are interested, our galleries are open. We're open Wednesday through Sunday. So if you want to come see the ancient bench, we'll be around. We're doing live stream demonstrations Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sunday. And we want to thank our sponsors, Welltower and Owens, Illinois, for helping us with our demonstrations. So I think that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. And if you ever have any questions, if you're watching from the future, you can comment them in the comments and we'll have somebody come back and answer them. So thanks, guys.